Hello and welcome to my channel. If you enjoy the strange, ghostly, mysterious kind of stories through ASMR, whether it be whisper or soft-spoken, then welcome, 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 welcome. Let's go ahead and dive right in, but before we do, go ahead and hit the like button and the subscribe and notification bell. I do upload every Tuesday. Let's get started. Today's story is titled The Capering Coffins of Christ Church. Back in the early 1800s, every time the Chase family crypt in Barbados was reopened for a new burial, it was discovered that the head lead coffins already interred had somehow shifted position and moved around the interior all on their own. Was some spectral hand at play? The Baron Combermere Stapleton Cotton was none too pleased. How could anyone seriously believe that the nondescript tomb he was standing in front of was haunted? Nevertheless, as governor of the island of Barbados, it was his duty to be there to quell the rumors that were spreading like wildfire among the superstitious natives of the Caribbean colony. Besides, he had to admit he was a wee bit curious as well. What if the stories were true? Lord Combermere was well liked and respected, and he knew his direct, no-nonsense demeanor would give added credence to whatever he decided to do after the investigation. Born to privilege in 1773, he entered the military at only 16, and by the age of 20 had worked himself up in the ranks to become one of the king's favorites. After deployments in India and Ireland, he earned fame as the commander of Wellington's cavalry in the Peninsular War against Napoleon. After the death of his father in 1809, the 36-year-old became the Baronet of Combermere Abbey, Shropshire, England. He would eventually become a Viscount, but, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Viscount. Back to the story. But rather than resign his commission, he stayed in George III's army, rising to the rank of lieutenant general. In 1817, Combermere was appointed governor of Barbados and commander of the West Indian forces. So here he was, 2 years later, taking his role in this supernatural charade quite seriously. He had to. Part of his job was to maintain order, peace, and stability. But this was something new. He had to convince the locals they weren't being overrun by denizens of the dark. Here's what he found so far. The Christchurch Parish Church, in whose cemetery Combermere stood, was located in Oistins, about 5 miles outside the capital city of Bridgeton. The first parish church was built near Dover Beach in 1629. It was destroyed by a flood 40 years later, strewing coffins and corporal remains from the churchyard across the shoreline. A new house of worship was erected inland small hill, but it was devastated in a 1780 hurricane. The structure the governor was at now dated to 1786. Although the sanctuary has a large cemetery, the Chase family tomb was just a few paces to the right of the front of the doors of the church. The vault was originally constructed around 1724 by the well-to-do Walrond family, which ran a sugar plantation on the island. The tomb was designed to be mostly subterranean, although the rectangular top of the crypt extends about 2 feet above the ground. The outside is mostly unadorned except for the words, "The Chase Vault," and what was most likely a family crest carved above the doorway. 6 short posts surround the staircase that lead down into the tomb. Those who enter the vault pass down 6 steps into a bare-walled room measuring 20 feet long by 6.5 feet wide. The front and side walls are made of bricks and mortar, the rear one of coral rocks. There are no niches or shelves, and the 2 long walls start to curve about halfway up their height to form an arched ceiling, about 7 feet overhead. A smooth concrete floor lies underfoot. The first occupant was Thomasina Goddard, who was buried in the crypt in a single wooden casket on July 31st, 1807. To close the tomb, a Devonshire marble slab was pushed into place, and it was sealed with concrete, a practice that would be followed with every burial that followed. According to some reports, by then this you'll have to excuse my pronunciation, the sepulcher. Comment below on how you pronounce that. It's spelled Sepulcher. Back to the story. So that sepulcher had already entered into the hands of a plantation owner named Thomas Chase, and Goddard was an extended family member. Others say that Chase didn't purchase the crypt until early the next year and simply allowed Goddard to remain there. But certainly he owned it by February the 22nd, 1808, when Chase's 2-year-old daughter, Mariana Maria Chase, was entombed in a lead coffin. When her casket was set down beside Goddard's, nothing seemed amiss. Indeed, the same was true 4 years later when the stone slab was moved aside to place the lead coffin containing the body of Thomas's elder daughter, Dorcas Chase, into the vault on July the 16th, 1812. Gossip was already spreading around the island, not about the vault, but about the circumstances of Dorcas's death. Although respected for his business acumen, the wealthy Thomas Chase was apparently one of the most hated men on Barbados. He had a violent temper and was thought to be particularly cruel to the slaves. Even his family wasn't immune to his bad moods. Although Dorcas had officially died of a withering sickness, it was thought that she had actually starved herself to death rather than continue to live under the dominion of a tyrannical father. The stage was set for the ghostly legend to begin. Just a month after Dorcas was buried, Thomas Chase himself died. He was laid to rest inside a wooden casket that was then placed into a massive leaden box. On the date of his funeral, August 9th, 8 men were required to carry the heavy coffin to the vault. The concrete was chipped away from the stone in front of the tomb, and the crypt opened. What met the pallbearers' eyes seemed unthinkable. Although Goddard's wooden tomb was still in place, both of the girls' leaden boxes were shifted position. In fact, Mary Anna's small, albeit still weighty, casket had moved to the other side of the room entirely and been turned on its head. The cemetery attendants added Thomas's coffin to the tomb, lined the 3 larger coffins side by side, and then set the toddler's casket crosswise on top of them. The door slab was moved back into place and sealed. But the damage had been done. Natives and slaves who had been no friend to the hard taskmaster Chase began to whisper that his daughter's spirits, or doopies, had known he was coming and moved their coffins to be as far away from him as possible. What other explanation could there be? The tomb had been cemented shut, undisturbed, and even if the grave robber had broken into the crypt looking for valuables, although none had been buried with the girls, the intruder couldn't have repositioned the lead coffins by himself. If several people had been involved, such a conspiracy would have been almost impossible to keep under wraps. As for speculation that angry slaves had been responsible, it was generally accepted that their dread of vengeful spirits would have prevented any of them from disturbing the sanctity of a burial vault. 4 years went by before the crypt was reopened on September 25th, 1816, as Samuel Brewster Ames, an 11-month-old baby, was placed within the tomb. The collected relatives and mourners peered inside to see if the lead coffins were out of kilter. They were. Some had even been turned end over end and were lying on their lids. The caskets were quickly rearranged and the vault resealed. This time, only 53 days went by before Samuel Brewster, another member of the extended Chase family, had been laid to rest. Crowds were now showing up whenever the crypt was opened. This time, those in attendance included the local magistrate and the rector of the Christchurch Parish Church, the Reverend Thomas Orderson. His personal logs gave a first-hand account. All of the coffins inside had repositioned themselves. In fact, some had shifted quite a distance and came to rest at odd angles. Poor Thomasina Goddard's wooden casket had been splintered in the melee of moving caskets. The minister, certain that there were natural explanations for the movement, had the vault examined from top to bottom. He checked for concealed entranceways and hidden compartments, as well as for cracks in the walls, floor, and ceiling. None was found. The coffins were aligned. Goddard's casket was reassembled and wedged between Brewster's and one of the walls, and the vault was resealed again. By now, everyone on Barbados knew about, and many feared, what was happening in the simple churchyard in Christchurch Parish. Plantation workers believed the casket's dancing was the work of the unhappy ghosts trapped within. Many plantation owners, especially those who had endured a recent slave uprising, felt their servants were breaking into the tomb at night to cause mischief. Their motive? Inciting terror. A nervous apprehension fell over the island. It was into this tense, foreboding atmosphere that Combermere arrived to Barbados. 2 years of relative calm passed. For the most part, people avoided talk of the Chase vault, but when it was announced that Thomasina Clark was to be interred in the crypt on July 7th, 1819, the morbid chatter started up once more. So here Combermere was, and he had not come alone. He was attended by 2 assistants, the fort commander and many of the island's clergymen, and of course dozens upon dozens of onlookers were crammed into the churchyard, uncaringly trampled over other grave sites, craning their necks to get a better look. 4 workmen slowly chiseled away at the door slabs, sealing mortar, finally chipping away enough to be able to slide the hefty stone to one side. Unconsciously, everyone in the assembled multitude drew a breath and leaned forward. Their long, patient wait did not go unrewarded. The coffins were haphazardly strewn more violently than ever before. It was as if some gigantic mystic claw had picked up all the caskets, lifted them high, and then dropped them to fall wherever they might. The children's coffins, which had been placed on top of the others, were now on the floor. The bony arm of Dorcas Chase was found hanging out of a hole in hers. According to most witnesses, this time only Thomasina Goddard's broken wooden box was undisturbed. If it had not been for the attendance of the governor, the other government commissioners, and clergy, pandemonium would no doubt have been broken out. Some people had theorized that perhaps earthquakes were moving the coffins. Others thought that water could have seeped into the chamber and floated the caskets, which then settled into disarray when the water receded. But no one could remember feeling any tremors during the time the coffins had been cavorting. And even if the lead caskets had been able to float, there was not enough room for them to spin 180 degrees, and in some cases flip over. Plus, it would have taken a lot of water in a very short period to fill the vault, and there had been no floods in recent memory. No, there seemed to be no natural explanation for what the townsfolk were seeing, especially since it was happening only to the Chase vault. In most people's minds, the verdict was unmistakable. A mischief ghost, or ghosts, was at work. Combermere took immediate action. He instructed his staff to check the interior of the vault, much like Orderson had done unofficially 3 years earlier. Only this time, the examination was much more thorough. Every square inch was inspected. There were no fractures, no cracks, no secret passageways. After the coffins were neatly arranged in place, powdery white sand was sprinkled on the floor. If footprints were discovered the next time the tomb was opened, it would be proof of human, not otherworldly intervention. The door slab was put into place and sealed with wet mortar. As a final deterrent to anyone disturbing the vault, the governor pressed his own seal into the wet concrete, as did his aide and 2 other officials. And so the wait began. As weeks turned into months, people claimed that muffled, unidentifiable sounds could be heard reverberating inside the tomb. I'm sorry, let's say that word again. Reverberating inside the tomb. Anticipation grew as the populace not so secretly wondered who in the Chase clan would go next, and although no one would admit to such unseemly or macabre impatience how soon someone would die, so the sepulchre could be reopened. When none of the family was accommodating by spring, the governor decided he had waited long enough. He would open the tomb himself. He had to put an end to the ghost stories. On April the 18th, 1820, Combermere gathered a party consisting of his recording secretary, the Honorable Nathan Lucas, who had sketched the position of the coffins the previous year before the vault was closed, the Reverend Orderson, Major J. Fitch, and two prominent men in the community, Robert Boucher and Roland Cotton. To actually do the physical work, 2 masons and 8 slaves were added to the entourage. And to show that he had nothing to hide, Combermere allowed anyone to come to the churchyard and witness the investigation. Hundreds showed up. First, the governor's men fully examined the exterior of the vault. There were no cracks or fissures. The cement sealing the slab was completely intact. All of the personal seals were in place. Nothing had been tampered with. Slowly the mortar was removed, and the men began the difficult task of sliding the covering stone to one side. As they pushed, scraping sounds emanated from the dark inner recesses of the tomb. Also, the stone was even tougher than usual to move. Was some demonic force holding onto the slab from the inside, trying to prevent them from entering the vault? No, but the answer was almost as frightening. Somehow, Dorcas Chase's casket had righted itself, traveled halfway across the dank chamber, and come to rest upright against the back of the marble stone. Baby Mary Anna Maria's casket had been thrown against the left wall with such force that part of it had broken off. All of the other burial boxes, again according to some with the exception of Thomasina Goddard's, had been similarly tossed about. But the fine layer of sand on the floor had not been disturbed. There were no footprints, nor any sign of water having displaced it. That night, Lucas would write in his diary, "I examined the walls, the arch, and every part of the vault, and found every part old and similar. And a mason in my presence struck every part of the bottom with his hammer, and all was solid. No one had broken into the tomb." Combermere, a veteran of many military campaigns, knew that panic could overwhelm the most rational men when faced with unpredictable and unknown forces. He realized that if the bizarre and unexplainable matters taking place at the Chase Vault were allowed to continue, hysteria might grip the entire island to the extent that he could lose control of his command. He had to act decisively. Some say it was the horror-stricken Chase family that made the decision, but more likely it came from the governor himself. The vault would be emptied and the coffins disturbed to be reinterred separately in various other cemeteries across the breadth of Barbados. Further, it was ordered that the Chase vault could never, ever be used again. It would remain empty, open, and unlocked. Those who dared to venture within could see for themselves that the tomb wasn't haunted. And so the crypt stands to this day, as it has for almost 2 centuries. Visitors to the grounds of the simple parish church can easily find the low, abandoned sepulchre along the southwestern perimeter of the graveyard, sheltered below a line of trees. No gate or door slab prevents inquisitive guests from walking down the steps and entering the dark cell. The barren tomb has remained quiet all these years. If you're in the neighborhood, why not risk a peek for yourself? Surely the pit spirits have gone by now. And if not, what's the worst that could happen? I hope you enjoyed today's story. And if you have any comments, please do so below. And if you do have your own story that you would like read, email me. My email is in the description box, and I will read it on a future episode. So hit the like button and subscribe. I do upload every Tuesday, so stay tuned. There are going to be more stories to come. So in the meantime,